I mean, at least I guess you could say, you're not an unfortunate innocent Afghani who gets drone bombed by the president just to make up for a bad news week. That information was also confirmed this week.
Yeah, well, and let's just get to one glib confirmation after another. Jen Psaki comes in and says, ask the question directly. Are you saying the vaccine mandates apply to American citizens but not to border crossers? And she said, that's correct. Moving on to another question. I mean, this is in your face at some point. I think we're at that point. We've been there for a while. The drone bombing, Robert. I mean, so now that has been confirmed. It was a father, his 7 kids coming out to see him. What they said was the secondary explosion, which confirmed explosives, has now been confirmed to have been a propane tank in a house next to them. I mean, you tell me, how is it possible for an administration to get something so wrong? I know fog of war, poop happens, but how does this happen?
Well, put it this way: if Trump was president, the media would be outraged, and Congress would be outraged for weeks, and impeachment proceedings would have already begun. So it gives you a sense of the conflict, the contradiction between the two. I think this is an impeachable act because it appears it was a rushed execution of innocent people without going through basic due diligence in order to cover up for a bad news week. And that's just embarrassing. I mean, one could argue the vaccine mandate in part was to change the news stories from the disaster and debacle of Afghanistan. And it comes with a joint chief of staff head who it turns out was conspiring with the Chinese to undermine the president of the United States. So, I mean, it's an extraordinary time to be alive, no doubt about that.
Well, okay, now explain this. I think I know what's going on with General Milley and this fiasco or this controversy, which the media is trying to normalize as being par for the course, but set the factual grounds so that people understand. And then I'm going to have a few questions on this.
Well, it goes back to what we discussed back at the time when we're trying to educate people that the military was not secretly on Trump's side. And I remember when there were people in the QAnon world who were saying that Trump should, suspend the Constitution or whatever and do, seize election machines and have the military take over and all of this sort of nonsense. And aside from that being a bad idea inherently, pointed out that the military hierarchy was not on Trump's side. Got a lot of hate mail over that. Mm-hmm. Now some of those folks are in the Hooskow, so you can figure out who was right and who was wrong. But the nature of it is that essentially what Milley was doing was conspiring in multiple ways against the president. He had agreed with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to not obey an order of the president of the United States while he was president. That was the first big problem. Now that came out a few months ago.
They're framing it only as being the nuke question. Was it only limited to the use of nukes, or was it in fact encompassing other military acts?
It was clearly much broader than that. It was that he wouldn't go along with any act of the president to use the military in any capacity, significant domestically in any way, or any major military adventure or event without talking to Pelosi first. He was going to disobey the president and basically make Speaker Pelosi effectively the president. And now it comes out that he was talking to the Chinese government officials concerning these matters. And so this is incredible. I mean, imagine if this had happened during the Soviet Union days, where the Joint Chief of Staff said he's not going to obey the president. Let's say they didn't like Reagan towards the end. They would talk to Tip O'Neill first and then talk to the Soviets first to see what to do. I mean, that's the kind of insanity that we're dealing with here. And people have called it treason. Politically, you could call it that. Legally, treason only applies in times when Congress has declared war, so it wouldn't be applicable legally.
But now, I don't remember where I heard it, but some people were saying that one justification is in fact factually incorrect, that Milley was using channels that were in fact open to him, whereas it might have been Tim Pool, it might have been somewhere else. In fact, Milley was not even going through legitimate channels that were open to him. He was in fact bypassing, shortcutting, or what's the word? Detouring the entire system and going through back channels that he had no legitimate or lawful reason to be using or access to. Is that your understanding?
Absolutely. And to give people an analogy, this is what they improperly accused Michael Flynn of doing. Flynn actually had the right to talk to the Russian ambassador, but they accused him of using back channels and said it was so severe he had to resign and should be in prison for years. Here you have the Joint Chief of Staff actually going through back channels in an illicit and illegal way at a critical time juncture with an actual adversary of the United States. I mean, the Chinese government's probably our biggest economic adversary, at least probably our biggest political adversary at this point, other than maybe Iran, depending on what your perception or your argument was, or North Korea. But North Korea is just a bulldog on the end of the rope of the leash of China. And so that makes it very disturbing, very, very disturbing. I mean, and probably haven't had anything like this since the Joint Chief of Staffs wanted to circumvent President Kennedy in the early 1960s with things like Operation Northwoods that they wanted to do even after he said no, and the Bay of Pigs where they wanted an invasion after he said no. So and we know what happened to President Kennedy in the end. So I think it raises serious questions about the entire hierarchy of the United States military. And why is that man still even in any position of power? He should be defrocked. He should be dishonorably discharged, not these honest soldiers asking some basic questions about religious and medical accommodations for their vaccines.
So, well, some people are asking if it's not treason, if it's not mutiny, what would be the most accurate charges to be laid or, charged?
Well, I mean, it's a violation of the chain of command, and it's a form of, I mean, what they were doing was a form of, was a real coup. And that's what it was. And there's a range of laws that apply to that because of his military duties and obligations. So that's what's applicable. When politically you could call it a kind of treason, it's just legally in America, treason is very limited to a select set of circumstances. It almost never occurs.
And so basically the word was circumventing. Someone actually brought up, he was
Yes.
circumventing the existing channels of the existing military to effectively say, some are going to say, well, it's in the weaning days. It's in the last days of the Trump presidency. We don't want a lame duck president who's getting, replaced in a month, starting any nuclear war, starting whatever. So that'll be the rationale, the justification for anyone who wants the steel man of what was done. But he was effectively even bypassing the existing chain of command. And like, who was he personally assuring this on behalf of? Who is he acting for if he's circumventing the entire existing chain of command?
Well, basically confirmed what Putin said many years ago, that he said many presidents come and go, but the men in gray suits run the show. And he was deeply right. And what Milley was doing is saying the deep state's still running the government. You don't have to worry about the elected president of the United States of America. But to go as far as he did, not just with the Pelosi problem, but to going to China outside the proper chain of command is very disturbing. That's unprecedented in modern American history.
Now, I'm being told, Cindy Mini says, no, it happened in October, not after the election. So I guess that makes it even worse.
That would absolutely make it, of course, even worse. And he was conspiring, frankly, against the president from the very beginning, from the time he was in positions of power.
All right, we got a good one here.
Yeah, it's a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That's a good
Article
citation.
94. The intent to usurp or override lawful military authority refuses in concert with any other person to obey orders or otherwise to his duty. Mutiny is a capital offense. I won't pursue that one any further. I'll just bring this one up. The best thing I got from the last 4 years was knowing I am the smartest person in the room. And then someone else says a clear violation of the Universal Code of Military Justice. Yes. Okay, it has that, and has that controversy just blown over? We're done with that now?
I mean, apparently nobody in Congress or the Biden administration wants to do anything about it because they're all in favor of it. Though it does relate. I mean, there was finally, speaking of people that did a lot of illegal activities that got covered up during the election season, finally, sleepy John Durham woke up and brought a prosecution he could have brought 2 years ago, identifying that all of that Russiagate Alpha Bank nonsense was a conspiracy by Clinton campaign lawyers, that they spread false information deliberately and in a criminal manner. And so one of the lawyers involved was finally indicted, could have been indicted a long time ago. He indicts it at the time it's going to have the least amount of impact, the least amount of press coverage. Shows you what Durham's real objective was throughout these proceedings. It was more cover up than expose. But at least he did finally bring an indictment. And it was an interesting one because it was one I had a debate with Dan Abrams of Law and Crime and ABC News, who was very critical of me, saying that there was illicit activities in Russiagate. And he said, what we really need to be focusing on, Barnes, is that Alpha Bank issue. Well, apparently Dan Abrams took the bait. He can issue an apology anytime soon. But finally we're seeing some action at least, and maybe some part of the record will finally be documented and detailed in court. But it shows what that whole scam was really all about all along.